when two female prisoners found each other behind bars. The metal door slammed shut behind Maya with a sound that echoed through her bones, a finality that made her stomach drop. She stood in the center of the concrete cell, her hands still trembling from the fingerprinting, the photographing, the stripping away of everything she had been on the outside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, casting shadows that seemed to mock her fall from grace. She had never imagined herself here, in this gray world of metal and concrete, surrounded by the hollow eyes of women who had learned to survive, in a place designed to break them. But life had a cruel way of rewriting the stories we thought were already written. And Maya's story had been rewritten in the most devastating way possible. She was 28 years old, a former nurse who had made one terrible decision in a moment of desperation. Her mother's medical bills had piled up like an avalanche, suffocating her with their weight, and Maya had convinced herself that taking those prescription medications from the hospital was borrowing, not stealing. She had planned to replace them, to make everything right. But the security cameras had seen everything, and the law didn't care about intentions or the love that drove someone to cross lines they never thought they would cross. Now she wore an orange jumpsuit instead of scrubs, and her hands that had once healed were cuffed and catalogued as belonging to a criminal. The first weeks were a blur of survival. Maya learned to keep her head down, to move through the routines with mechanical precision, to build walls around her heart so thick that nothing could penetrate them. She ate the tasteless food. She showered in the communal stalls with her eyes fixed on the tiles. She lay on her thin mattress at night and stared at the ceiling, counting the days until she could breathe free air again. 3 years stretched ahead of her like an endless desert, and she could feel herself shrinking, becoming smaller and harder with each passing day, as if she were turning into stone from the inside out. But prison had a way of forcing proximity, of pushing people together whether they wanted it or not. It was during recreation time in the courtyard, a space surrounded by high walls and watched by guards in towers, that Maya first noticed her. The woman sat alone on a bench near the basketball court, a book open in her hands, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. There was something about the way she held herself, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in this harsh environment, as if she carried an invisible shield that kept the chaos at bay. Maya found herself drawn to that stillness, to the way the woman seemed to exist, in her own world, even as the noise and violence of prison life swirled around her. Her name was Sarah, and Maya learned her story in fragments, pieces shared during those brief moments of recreation time when they began to sit on the same bench, at first in silence, then with tentative words that grew into conversations.
Sarah had been a high school English teacher,
Beloved by her students, respected in her community. She had been driving home from a school event when a drunk driver had swerved into her lane, causing an accident that killed 2 people. Sarah had been sober, had done nothing wrong, but the investigation had uncovered an old DUI on her record from her college years, and the prosecutor had twisted the narrative, painting her as a reckless repeat offender. The jury had convicted her of vehicular manslaughter, and now she was serving 8 years for a tragedy that haunted her every waking moment. As the weeks turned into months, Maya and Sarah's connection deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of the lives they had lost, the people they had been before the walls closed in around them. Sarah spoke of her students, of the books she loved, of the small apartment she had decorated with plants and paintings. Maya talked about her mother, about the hospital shifts that had exhausted her but fulfilled her, about the dreams she had abandoned when reality became too heavy to carry. In a place designed to isolate and dehumanize, they found in each other something precious and rare, understanding without judgment, companionship without expectation, a safe harbor in the storm. The shift from friendship to, something deeper happened so gradually that Maya couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when her feelings transformed. It might have been the day Sarah shared her lunch when Maya had been too sick to eat breakfast, or the night Maya woke from a nightmare and found a note slipped under her cell door with a quote from a poem Sarah had memorized. It might have been the afternoon in the library, when their hands brushed while reaching for the same book, and the electricity of that touch sent a shock through Maya's entire body, waking parts of her she thought had died, or perhaps it had been growing all along, a seed planted in the barren soil of their despair. watered by kindness and tended by the simple act of seeing each other as fully human. Maya had never been with a woman before, had never questioned her sexuality or imagined herself in this kind of relationship. But love, she was discovering, didn't ask permission or follow the scripts we write for ourselves. Love found the cracks in our carefully constructed walls and poured through like light, illuminating all the places we had kept in darkness. When she looked at Sarah, she saw not just a friend but a reflection of her own soul. Someone who understood the weight of guilt and the struggle to forgive oneself. Someone who made the unbearable somehow bearable. The realization terrified her. In prison, showing vulnerability was dangerous, and showing affection to another woman could invite mockery, violence, or worse. The guards watched everything, and the other inmates had their own hierarchies and codes. Maya tried to push her feelings down, to lock them away in the same box where she kept all her other grief and longing. But Sarah's presence had become oxygen, and trying not to breathe was impossible. It was Sarah who spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper one evening in the recreation yard as the sun set behind the high walls, painting the concrete in shades of amber and gold. She told Maya that she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again, that in the darkest chapter of her life, she had found a light she didn't want to lose. She said the words simply, without drama or pretense, as if she were stating a fact as fundamental as gravity. And Maya, who had spent months building barriers, felt them all crumble in an instant. She reached for Sarah's hand, their fingers intertwining with a rightness that made her want to weep. And she said the only thing that mattered, that she felt it too. Loving someone in prison required a different kind of courage. They had to be careful, discreet, protecting what they had from a system that could punish them for finding solace in each other. They learned to communicate in glances across the cafeteria, in the brief moments when they passed in hallways, in letters they wrote and exchanged through trusted friends. They stole minutes together whenever they could, in corners of the library or during outdoor time, their conversations now layered with an intimacy that transformed everything. The prison that had seemed like a tomb became slightly more bearable because they were navigating it together. But the reality of their situation was never far from their minds. Sarah had years left on her sentence, and Maya's release date, while closer, still felt impossibly distant. They existed in a liminal space, building something meaningful in a temporary world, knowing that their future was uncertain at best. The fear of separation haunted them, as did the knowledge that the outside world might not understand or accept what they had found behind bars. Maya's family didn't know about Sarah, and Sarah had lost contact with most of her friends and relatives. After her conviction, they were each other's world because the world had shrunk to these walls and these moments they carved out of borrowed time. The challenges intensified when other inmates began to notice their closeness. Jealousy and judgment flourished in the confined space of prison, and whispers started to circulate. There were women who resented their happiness, who saw any joy as an affront in a place meant for suffering. Maya and Sarah faced harassment, snide comments, even threats from those who wanted to tear down what they had built. They had to be stronger than the hatred, more resilient than the cruelty, and there were days when the weight of it all felt crushing. The lowest point came when they were caught holding hands. During a movie night in the common room, a guard reported them and they were separated, placed in different cell blocks as punishment for what was deemed inappropriate contact. The weeks apart were agony. Maya felt like part of her had been amputated, and she moved through her days in a fog of misery. She had survived prison before Sarah, but now that she knew what it felt like to be seen and loved, the isolation was a different kind of torture. She wrote letters that she couldn't send, filled pages with words that had nowhere to go, and she wondered if this was how the story would end, with them torn apart by a system that couldn't comprehend the redemption they had found in each other. But Sarah had taught her about resilience, about the strength found in literature and poetry, about the human capacity to endure. And Maya had taught Sarah about compassion, about second chances, about the possibility of healing even in the most unlikely places. They had both been broken when they entered these walls, but together, they had begun to piece themselves back into new shapes. Not the people they had been, but perhaps better versions, tempered by suffering and transformed by love. Through appeals and good behavior, and the advocacy of a sympathetic counselor who recognized that their connection was helping. Rather than harming their rehabilitation, they were eventually allowed to return to the same cell block. The reunion was quiet but profound, a return to breathing after holding their breath for too long. They promised each other that they would be more careful, but they also promised that they wouldn't hide what they meant to each other. Love shouldn't require apology, even here, especially here. As Maya's release date finally approached, the joy was complicated by grief. She would be leaving Sarah behind, stepping back into a world that might not have a place for who she had become. They talked late into the nights about what would happen, about whether what they had could survive the separation, about whether Maya would visit, whether she would wait, whether the love that had bloomed in captivity could transplant to freedom. Sarah told her not to make promises, not to limit her life for someone still trapped. But Maya couldn't imagine a future that didn't include this woman who had saved her in ways that had nothing to do with escape and everything to do with finding herself. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of love to find us even in our darkest moments, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that redemption and connection are possible anywhere, even in the places we least expect them. Your support means everything and helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of human resilience. The morning Maya walked out of those prison doors, she carried with her a letter from Sarah and a promise she had made to herself. She would rebuild her life. Yes, but she would do it with the knowledge that love had found her in the most unlikely place and had changed her fundamentally. She would visit Sarah every week that the prison allowed. She would write letters that kept their connection alive, and she would work toward a future where they could both be free, not just from prison but from the shame and isolation that had brought them there. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you something from the heart. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that love can heal our deepest wounds, please leave a comment below sharing one word that describes what you're feeling right now. Let's create a community of hope together. Maya stood on the outside, looking back at the gray building that had contained her body but had also housed her. Transformation. She thought about Sarah inside those walls, probably in the library with a book, holding on to the same hope that Maya carried with her into this new chapter. Their story wasn't the fairy tale she had once imagined her life would be, but it was real and hard-won and more beautiful for all its imperfections. They had found each other behind bars, two women who had lost everything, and in losing everything, they had discovered what truly mattered. Love didn't ask where you were or what you had done or whether the world would approve. Love asked only if you were brave enough to reach across the divide and hold on when everything else fell away. And they had been brave enough, both of them, to say yes to something that defied every odd stacked against them, and that yes had made all the difference.